story of The Conjuring is much more gruesome than what the movie portrayed. Director of the movie, James Wan, had a conversation with Andrea, the eldest of the 5 Perron sisters, about the horrors that her and her family endured while living inside of their haunted home, and James did his best to incorporate as much of the truth as possible inside of the movie, but after Hollywood reviewed the unreleased movie, they said it was entirely too scary and needed to be toned down in order for James to reach his goal of getting the movie a PG-13 rating instead of rated R. But even after toning the movie down by taking so much of the truth out, Hollywood still gave The Conjuring a rated R rating and told James that there was nothing that he can do to fix it. Hollywood told them that there was no sense in making a movie that no one would sit and watch until the end. They strongly believed that the audience would literally walk out of the theater before the movie even finished.
But worse, right?
They really had to tone it down for the film. James Wan, the director, was shooting for a PG-13 rating. He wanted to bring this story to as many people as he could. And when he got the R rating, I was with him, and he hit the roof. We had to pull him back down. And he said to the MPAA, "What do I have to take out of the film in order to get a PG-13?" And they said, "There's nothing you can remove. It's just too scary." And they had already toned it down so much that he was shocked.
Andrea stated in an interview that 95% of the movie is made up.
The movie's about 95% fiction.
The Conjuring was supposed to be filmed in the state of Rhode Island inside the original home that the hauntings occurred. But after hearing the terrifying stories that Andrea told James, he didn't want to step foot in Rhode Island, let alone the home. He started to believe that the whole state of Rhode Island was haunted.
True story, and when James Wan, the director of the film, read the book, he said, we're not filming in Rhode Island. We're not going to Rhode Island. We're not going to look at the farmhouse. We're not going. No, absolutely not. It freaked him out so much. Bless his little heart. He's so sweet. He's a very sweet man. That they literally changed the story to make it less terrifying because they thought that the real true story would run people right out of the theater.
Wow.
I didn't think there was any point in making a film if nobody stayed to watch it.
The day that the family of 7 moved into the farmhouse in 1971, it took no more than 5 minutes of being in the home when they experienced their first ghostly encounter. All 5 of the Perron sisters noticed seeing an oddly dressed man in the corner of the dining room that no one else saw. His eyes were pierced on the elderly man that sold the farmhouse to the family. The odd man watched as he packed his belongings, but seconds after vanished into thin air.
How much time passed before you knew that something was different about this house?
About 5 minutes.
Wow. What was the first thing that happened that clued you in?
Well, we bought the house in December of 1970, but my mother refused to move at Christmas. Imagine that. So we moved in the first week of January 1971 in the middle of a snowstorm, swirling ice storm. And my dad, it was a whole caravan, and it was chaos, of course, moving days tend to be. But my dad handed me a large box off the back of the truck and said, "Take this to your mother in the kitchen." So I went through the parlor door, and I had to walk the entire length of the house to get to the kitchen and the pantry, and it was more than 110 feet long. So I walked into the dining room and I saw an oddly dressed man in the corner of the dining room, and I greeted him because I was a polite child. I said, "Good morning," and he didn't respond to me. His focus was entirely on the elder gentleman who was moving out of the house, who had sold it to us. And so I kept going, and I walked in the kitchen and said, "Mom, who's that other man with Mr. Kenyon in the dining room?" She said, "There is no other man in the dining room." And then Nancy came in, Christine came in, Cindy came in, and the last sister came in and said, "That man in the dining room just disappeared."
1 or 2 nights after this occurrence, one of the sisters, Cynthia, ran out of her room in the middle of the night and crawled into bed with Andrea. When Andrea asked her what was wrong, Cynthia told her that she kept hearing voices in her room. Andrea thought that she was just hearing their sister Christine because she was known to be a sleep talker. Cynthia quickly denied that, saying it wasn't Christine because she was sound asleep. She said it was voices around her bed talking all at once, saying,
"There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. There are 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall." Over and over again, getting louder and louder.
The mother, Mrs. Perron, was affected the most by the home out of everyone else in the family. About a week after the family moved into the home, Mrs. Perron went to go check out the barn. Her and her husband had promised the girls a horse in the spring. When she walked into the barn, she heard a strange sound. She initially thought it was a bird trapped inside the barn, but then she looked up and saw a knife above her head, spinning viciously. It then came plummeting down directly at her, almost slicing the side of her neck. But luckily, she had on her husband's thick puffer jacket that saved her life. After this traumatic incident, Andrea noticed her mother starting to act really strange. She questioned her mother's odd behavior, but Mrs. Perron never spoke of what transpired with her children. She eventually tried to come out to her husband about what had happened to her, but he was in denial. He was always in denial, which led to the decline in their marriage, and it also led to the daughters feeling as though they couldn't open up to him about what they were experiencing as well. But when Mr. Perron had his own ghostly encounter, he had no choice but to believe and debunk any disbeliefs he had before. Mrs. Perron's health started to decline, and she began to age rapidly due to the evil entities that latched onto her from the house. She had another freak encounter where she was literally beaten with a wooden hanger by one of the entities. This terribly frightened her, making her behavior and health much worse.
Suddenly we hear my mother screaming, and we all ran into the bathroom and then threw open the door to the warm room and stood there, including our neighbor, watching my mother be brutally beaten by this coat hanger. She had bruises and abrasions all over her neck and her head, her chest. And she was standing there naked. She had dropped her robe to the floor, and it was a shocking sight.
I can't even fathom.
It was shocking. Needless to say, our neighbor left very quickly, and she never came back to the house. In all the years that we lived there, we went to visit them, but she never came back. Nor did she let her children come to the house.
News started to eventually spread about the farmhouse. It is unknown how people started to find out, but eventually word got out to famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. They came to try to help the family like we all saw in the movie, but in real life, they wound up making things 10 times worse.
Warrens did not step in and rescue us. The Warrens stepped in, and even though I believe it was unintentional, they really made matters worse, and they were in over their heads right from the inception. They didn't realize what they were dealing with and how powerful it was. To Mrs. Warren's credit, I will say that she did step into the house and say, I sense a malignant presence in this house. Her name is Bathsheba. And there's no way she could have known that because she had no background and no history on the house at all. However, she then blamed anything and everything that happened of a negative nature in the house on Bathsheba, which is how she became, the villainess in the film. It was gross inaccuracies in terms of that. My mother would never have ever done anything to hurt any of her children. To see on film it being portrayed as my mother being willing as a possessed person to plunge a pair of scissors into the heart of her baby girl, April, is beyond absurd. It's beyond absurd.
The exorcism that we saw Ed and Lorraine conduct on Mrs. Perron in the movie wasn't really an exorcism at all. It was said to be a seance that went terribly wrong, almost killing Mrs. Perron. Andrea stated that the exorcism done in the movie was nothing compared to the seance that happened in real life. Everyone who witnessed this seance happen had a look of terror on their faces.
What happened during that seance?
It was far more intense than anything that they could have portrayed on film. It did not happen in the cellar, it happened in the dining room. And I knew from that moment, I was never one to believe in demons. I knew evil existed, but and I still don't know exactly what a demon is. But I will tell you that they brought a priest and a medium with them to the house, a full technical crew that were trying to film this event, and they inadvertently opened a door that they could not close. The medium invited the spirits in, and with them came something which attacked my mother. If she was possessed, it was for a brief period of time, but I saw it all with my own eyes. And what I know is that whatever attacked her was not of this world. It spoke through her in a language that does not exist on this planet. and it levitated her in the chair that she was in, and within a split second when it was done, curling her body into a ball you would have expected to hear bones breaking. It threw her into the adjacent parlor about 20 feet away in literally a split second.
You saw this. How old were you?
15.
15 years old. Documented in the Warren files as well. There were several people who saw this all happen.
Before the elderly man that sold the farmhouse to the family left, he pulled Mr. Perron to the side and left an important message for him and his family to always remember.
Leave the lights on at night.
And that is how terrifying the true story actually is.